Actually, it's a continuation of the residential training. Before there was a couple weeks ago, we had a residential purchase agreement training by Michelle, and Christine Fan requested to have a similar training in the commercial real estate. So that's what we have for today. So Michelle, why don't you take it away?
Okay, thank you very much, everybody, for attending. So as I was reviewing for our meeting today, I'm going to go full screen. I noticed that the commercial agreement has a lot of the same as the residential. So what I'm going to do, and the reason that I titled the meeting Hitting the High Points, I'm going to go through the contract with you and show you where the changes are and what specifically applies to commercial. Because if you look at this commercial purchase agreement, you're going to notice a lot of this grid is going to look just like the residential, which we did an extreme amount of training on 4 sessions. So all of this is going to look the same to you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the contract. I'm going to show you where some differences are. I'm also going to go over the disclosures with you. So let's get started. One of the differences is here. It's not a primary, of course. The occupancy type will be investment. So you see it defaults to conventional. So this is pretty much like the residential grid. So let's go down and I'll point out the differences for you. Let me keep scrolling. I hope I'm not making anybody sick. Okay, with the scrolling. Okay, so I'm going to go down. So anything here, we're going to go over this later in the contract. So excluded items you may not know about when you're first writing an offer. Listing agents should be picking those up on a counter if there are any. Okay, so all of this is the same. Now let's look here, environmental survey. The buyer, seller, or both can pay. So if you want to survey a phase 1, go ahead and check what party. And if you want the report, put phase 1 environmental report, okay, here, and then check which party will be paying for it. So very important, any report you want, this is just the survey, but make sure if you're expecting a phase 1 report that you're inserting it here, or if you have other reports that you're requesting, go ahead and insert them here, okay? So it's all going to look the same to you. Governmental point of sale inspections. Coming on down, this pertains to HOAs, private transfer fees. And here you'll notice they left you some blanks for fees or costs of other reports. If there was a city report or anything like that, make sure that you're addressing it. If you know about it, or call the city. You can also check the governmental reports that would be checked to the seller. That should cover that. But if there's any other fees or costs here, such as termite or anything like that, that you want one party to pay for or both, make sure you're inserting it, or listing agents, make sure you're catching that on a counter. Now, here's something I think is extremely important. And this is different, of course, from the residential. You want to, as a commercial agent, you want to check the boxes for income and expense statements and tenant estoppel certificates. It's very important because whatever was said discussing, or other things on the MLS, you want to make sure that you're receiving an income and expense statement directly from the seller, and that they are providing that to you so you can review it and make your decision on the property. So this is all going to look the same. So I'm going to scroll down to page 6. And we're going to go over some of the items here that are more particular to commercial, okay? So number 9, agents, go over this very carefully. It's the same in the residential, but read all of item number 9, because the items included in the cell, listing agents, unless you counter these out, here they're included. So make sure you're reading this and you're countering it out. Make sure if there's leased items that you're letting the buyer know. And if you are leasing, some units are leasing washing machines and dryers or things of that nature, and you expect that buyer to take on that lease and qualify for it and or buy that contract out, make sure you're stipulating that in your counter offers. If you come down here, you're looking here, they're even addressing home automation, smart home features. Make sure if there's any electronic devices that the seller wishes to keep that aren't hardwired, that you're excluding those, because if you're not, then they're going to assume that comes with the property to operate the property. And you'll see here that they're explaining it further. So my recommendation is that we're all very familiar with paragraph 9, that we understand in it what is included and what's excluded, because you don't want any problems during escrow where somebody's, you know, having a problem over an alarm system. So make sure that you're disclosing what the seller wishes to keep. For instance, even if there's a window insert air conditioner, I've saw landlords take that out. Make sure that if that's the case, that you're excluding that AC, window AC, and that you're replacing the window or whatever. Okay. And here it's telling you to let them know about leased or liened items and systems. Extremely important. Make sure that you deliver the lease documents to them, any warranty, and a financing statement. You can have your seller request from the company, if they indeed are financing, a payoff quicker than, you know, don't wait. Get that payoff ahead of time. Yes, it will change, but you can at least supply a copy as of today's date of that payoff so they know what that would cost. And if the seller's not paying it, they need to have that in consideration for their financing. Okay. So let's see, let me go to page right here. So here's the items excluded from the sale: flat screen TVs and speakers and other items. So again, be very familiar with these paragraphs, because these are included. The rest of the contract, pretty much, you're going to be very familiar with it, with the exception of making sure you understand what's included and excluded, and checking for the income and expense and tenant estoppels, which are very important. Okay. So this is just going over smoke detectors. You have to put those into the units or to the property. Okay. So here's one, information and advice on features that I think we need to be clued into. The following installations shall be completed prior to final verification of condition of property unless otherwise agreed. Approved fire extinguishers, sprinklers, hoses, if required by law. And if there's a pool, that drain cover and anti-entrapment device on the pool. Now, if you expect the buyer to pay for any of these, listing agents, make sure you're countering that to them. Get that in your counter so they can do that, you know, prior to closing escrow if it's required, because they're going to need to deposit those additional funds into escrow to take care of those repairs. Normally the seller is going to do these items, but if your deal is so good and the seller has structured it for the buyer to pay, make sure they're getting the money into escrow to hold. So information and advice on requirements, it's telling the buyer and seller advised to seek information from a knowledgeable source regarding local and state mandates, whether they are point of sale requirements or requirements of ownership. We as agents do not have expertise in this area, and we cannot ascertain all of the requirements or cost of compliance. Okay. So down here, here's a notification via link again. As we've discussed several times in our other contract training, please don't research this for the buyer. Let them go ahead and look at the link. We cannot guarantee that the government or whoever has provided the link has it up to date daily. So please let your buyers research those links. Okay. So now we're going to come down to page 8, because there is a lot of disclosures here, a lot of talk that we need to look at. So surveys and plans, and engineering documents. If the seller has some survey and plans and engineering documents, they need to provide the buyer a copy. If they have any permits, they need to also provide the buyer a copy. What permits can those be? It could be business permits. Some cities require that you have a business license to operate, for instance, LA for units. So make sure if be asking the seller these questions, listing agents, look at this list on page 8 and make sure you're asking if they've done any structural modifications on that building or those units. Make sure they're disclosing that. And if the government compliance, so if they've done any improvements, additions, alterations, the same as we would do with a house or a residential unit, make sure that they're disclosing that. And if there's any, if the seller has received any notifications of violations on that property, they need to let the buyer know, okay? So what could be a violation? Maybe they need to install a earthquake shutoff valve or something like that. But as listing agents, make sure specifically you're going over this page 8, just print out a copy for yourself and make sure you're asking the seller all of these questions on commercial property so that you know that you've done your due diligence with them and you're providing all the documentation that you need to the buyer. You know, we can't be, we don't know what we know. So let's make sure that we're asking the seller about these documents so that we can get those turned in. Known material facts, again, just like on a residential, if the seller knows of any known material facts that would affect a buyer's decision on the property, make sure that they are disclosing those. We will be going through commercial disclosures after this, so I'll show you what form you would use to disclose those, okay? So tenancy related disclosures. If there's any rental service agreements, if there's a property management company, all of those need to be given over to the new buyer so they can make the decision. And also income and expense statements. If you checked it, then the seller should be providing your buyer the income and expense statements. If the seller has an accountant, maybe they can provide that to them, or they can make an Excel spreadsheet. You know, that's really up to the seller, but they can use their receipts and do that. So tenant estoppel certificates, we did check on this offer because we always want to check that. We're going to be getting copies of the lease, but we're also have asked for the tenant estoppels. So I've had situations, and I'm sure agents that have sold multi-units have ran into this from time to time, where a tenant will not sign it. So if they're not going to sign it, we do our best to get that signed. It says right here that the seller shall notify the buyer and provide the unsigned tenant estoppel that was provided to the tenant. Okay, so if the tenant is refusing and the seller or the seller's agent just can't get it signed, or the property manager, please give the buyer the unsigned document so that we are contractually doing what we're supposed to be doing. So that's very important, and I have had that happen. So yes, that does occur. So one other thing, we're going to be providing lease documents to the buyer. And how do you prove that you gave the buyer all the lease documents? It may be overkill, but what I've done, and it was a large complex, I went to the buyer's property where he was residing in LA, and I asked him to initial the corner of each lease and all the supporting documents on those tenants. And I left him a copy unsigned. I told him when I got back to the office, I will scan those the signed leases. Now, why was that important? Later, after it closed, he called me and said, I didn't get this, this, and that. And I said, I'll send you the initial leases that you had. So you want to make sure that if you are turning over a stack of documents, and you're the listing agent, ask the buyer's agent to get those leases initialed for you. That's my advice. You can take it or leave it, but for me, it saved me because there was a parking dispute after the close of escrow, and that was already disclosed on the leases where the tenants were parking. So you want to make sure that you're protecting your seller, you're protecting your buyer, you're protecting yourself. It's just easy. Get the stack signed, leave a copy for them, and when you get back to the office, scan that stack over to the buyer, or buyer's agent scan it to the listing agent. It'll save you a lot of headache later if something occurs after the close or towards the end of escrow. So changes during escrow. Prior to close of escrow, seller may engage in the following acts: proposed changes subject to the buyer's rights, rent or lease of any vacant unit or other part of the premise, alter, modify, or extend any existing rental or lease agreement. So if there's a vacant unit or one is coming up for extension, you need to be communicating with the buyer, letting them know about any proposed changes, and deliver written notice to the buyer so that they know that tenant or wants to extend for a year or two. You want to ask them about the rental of vacant units and make sure that you are letting them know about the rent so that everybody's on the same page. So make sure that you're communicating if there are vacant units and you want to rent it. Make sure that the buyer and the seller are communicating, or the agents on that. Give a proper notice and let them know about that. So you're also certifying that the security deposits have not been applied by the seller with any rental agreement and current law, and shall be transferred in its entirety to the buyer at close of escrow. And the seller needs to notify each tenant in compliance with civil code. So when a landlord takes over, or excuse me, when a seller sells the property, be reminding your clients to notify, for the new owner to notify the tenants of the change of ownership and where they should be mailing their rent payments, or how that will be handled. And then the previous seller, make sure you're mailing a letter or delivering them that the units have been sold, or the building, so that there's no mix up and the rent goes to the appropriate address. Okay. So so I'm going to roll down to page 13, and then we're going to go over some disclosures. Okay, environmental hazard consultation. The seller and the buyer can consult with technical and legal experts concerning the existing testing, discovery, location, and evaluation of the risk posed by environmentally hazardous substances. So a lot of times with the phase 1, if it needs to go to phase 2, they'll advise you, but we're not experts on this. Let them hire somebody. We don't make any representation concerning this. So that's just a disclosure there. ADA is a big thing. And again, we're not experts on that. The buyer and seller are advised to contact a qualified real estate attorney, contractor, architect, engineer, or other qualified professional of their choosing, determine to what degree, if any, the ADA can impact the principal or this transaction, ADA requirements. So that's something for you to know about, that we can't advise on that because we wouldn't know if it's, the bathrooms are ADA compliant, or the entryways. That's left up to the professionals, and that is telling them right here. Okay, so now the rest of this is just looks pretty much like residential. So I'm going to go in, and we're going to go into commercial disclosures, because if you haven't done a commercial deal, there may be a couple that you haven't seen before. So I'm going to go out of this, and we're going to go into our disclosures. So I'm going to click through very quickly these, but we're going to go into more depth into the ones that you may not have seen before. Oops. So here's the required disclosures. You're going to, again, provide the CBGR disclosure. And we're all familiar with this. This is just telling them about inspections and about investigating the, you know, where the property is located. And you see here, you click commercial property purchase agreement, it's here, okay? So you provide that. We're all pretty familiar with that form. And I would also advise, even if they tell you, I'm not doing an exchange, please go ahead and provide this. It doesn't hurt anything to provide the 1031 exchange advisory. Let them check with their tax accountant. We are not expert in that. Let them check, but at least we've advised them to go ahead and check with their accountant. And you see it's got the commercial logos on it. So please, every time you're selling a non-owner occupied property, I will say, even if it's a house that's been rented out, please get the advisory signed for our file. That will help a lot. Okay. So commercial earthquake disclosure report. This is required, the questions to be answered if it's pre-1975. Here's the form for the seller to fill out, not us, the seller. And if they don't know, they can check don't know, or if it doesn't apply. This form is located, we have it on our CBGR website under the agent tab. So you can go ahead and pull this from there and print it out and have your seller. This is the commercial property earthquake disclosure report for pre-1975 properties, okay? So the commercial earthquake safety booklet, you can also pull from our website. It's rather large. Let me see how long it's going to take to come up. And at the end, so on this booklet, you want to make sure that you have the booklet receipt signed, that they've received this. So it is at the end of the booklet. So this is very nice booklet. You can just print it. You can just send them a link to it, attach it to an email, send it to the agent or to your clients, and make sure you're having them sign the receipt at the end of the booklet that you did indeed give this to them. Okay. So now here's some disclosures that you may not have seen before if you haven't done a commercial deal, and let's go over them. So this is the property information sheet. If you think of it in terms, this is like the master disclosure sheet, I call it, because here is where the buyer the seller is going to disclose to the buyer all material items that he knows about the property or any other items. So the owner, you put the name here and the street address, the county the property is located in. Briefly describe the property. It may be multi-unit, it may be a commercial office building. Just put a brief description here, herein after referred to as the property. The seller is certifying that if there's any material defects, they're writing none. But if they know of some, it can be typed in right here on the form. So you would type in, or the seller can write in, and if they know of any defects, you could also put see attached addendum or just an attachment sheet so that they can write everything. Okay, equipment. So it's asking the seller all of these questions. We don't answer them. They need to answer them. Don't leave any blanks. If the answer to these questions are none, please have them instruct them to write in none. So anything here, none, none, if it's none, or write in a description. Utilities, they have some check boxes here, or other, if there's something other they need to disclose about utilities, make sure they're putting it in. They're asking about insurance. If there's been any claims filed, make sure you're writing none or disclosing whatever claim file that the seller is doing that. Compliance with laws, and the owner has no actual knowledge of any aspects or condition which violates applicable laws. So they read this and they either disclose something or they write none. Hazardous substance and mold, they read this and write none if there's nothing to disclose, all the way down. Fire damage, Has it suffered any material fire damage? If not, write none. Action suits or proceedings against the property are pending. Write none if there's none. Owner has not served any notice of defaults on tenants. So it's asking here if they're late or anything. If there's no notice of default, write none. Government proceedings. So they're gonna go through this form and they're going to draft it out. And again, if they need more paper, you can certainly put see attached on here. Make sure that it's clear that there is an attachment where they've answered the questions. Short sell, make sure there are no blanks here. Make sure everything says none if it's none, or that you've checked the appropriate box on the check boxes. Other, it will be presumed there are no additional items which warrant disclosures unless they are set forth herein. You could put see attached, or if it's something small, you could have it typed in. So this is for the owner to fill out. They date it, they sign it, print their name and title. This goes over to the buyer for them to review. Okay, so make sure this, I guess if we're thinking from a standpoint of residential to commercial, this would be like, I guess, equivalent to a TDS in a way, but make sure that this is getting done. This is extremely important. This is all the disclosures on the property. There aren't as many disclosures on commercial, but we need to be sure that we're very thorough on the property information sheet. Okay, so I'm going to go over another one that if you haven't done commercial, you may not have seen before, and it is required. So this is called the seller's mandatory disclosure. Do not use in the sale of residential properties. It's stating right here, 1 to 4 units. This is not required. So on commercial property, you're going to go ahead and fill this up. You're still required to provide a commercial NHD report. So you can either check here and provide my NHD, or it's perfectly fine if you want to put in the NHD provider of the seller's choice. Check the box here, type in the name of that company. So make sure that you are providing, when you order a commercial NHD report, check here, put the name of the company. I would put the date of the report and attach it. So order that early so you can get this mandatory disclosure statement done. So you want to order your NHD, your commercial, get it early, attach it, make sure you're filling all this out, and you're going through this. The earthquake safety, they're giving them a link to the booklet. I always also send them that colored copy, which is on our website, so it's easy to go ahead and send it. So the properties here, I always put seller required to provide a booklet. I suppose if it's 1975, you don't have to provide it, but I always provide it. So go ahead and provide the booklet. It doesn't hurt, because our company requires that you give us a receipt that you have provided that booklet. So for us, we want you to provide the booklet to the buyer. Okay, so this is just seller's knowledge. So they're going to be answering all of these questions. It's up to the seller's knowledge. It's pretty simple questions to be answered by the seller. This is nice. It's asking about a death on the property. And if there's anything other for them to disclose, they've left number 10 as other. So if there's anything other that the seller feels they need to disclose, they can go ahead and insert that, have it typed in. This again is not filled out by us. It is filled out by the seller. Make sure they're signing and dating it, provide it to the buyer. So get your commercial NHD report ordered sooner rather than later, because you want to be able to provide this right away. I would say on opening of escrow, because if there's anything in there the buyer doesn't like in the natural hazards, you've supplied it to them right away. Okay, so I'm going to pull up a tenant estoppel form. Most of you have probably seen these. So this is for the landlord. You can help them as an agent fill it out. It's going to state who pays for the utilities, the tenant or the landlord. the security deposit, the current rent. So this should be filled out in its entirety. It's also going to say who owns what, who owns the appliances, the landlord or the tenant. So it's saying, does the landlord or the tenant own it? So there's check marks for each of those. Make sure that this has been filled out completely before it's presented to the tenants to sign. And then it's saying here, a tenant has not been given any free rent, partial rent rebates, rental abatements, or rent concessions of any kind except as follows. The only thing that I've ever seen here is maybe there's a tenant on site that gets a discount for managing the property. I've seen that, but that's probably about the only thing I've seen. So make sure this is filled out in its entirety before it's presented to the tenants to sign it. And I want to just point out something in LA. If any of you are interested in selling in LA, I'm going to give you some information that I think is nice to know. It puts us ahead of other agents that may not know about this or provide this documentation. The registration for the rental unit subject to rent control. This is a form that the Los Angeles Housing and Community Department puts out. So what's nice is, let me get down to here. It's telling the new owner how the registration process works, because it is required for rent control units in Los Angeles. And I've sold in Los Angeles. That's the only reason I know about it. It tells the new owners that they have 45 days from the close of escrow or recording for the ownership change. And then here's the fees. Okay, down here. So registration fee schedule, it even shows them on, these are for units, apartment units. So it's showing the fees here. So if you happen to be selling any rent controlled units in LA, I would say pull this off and give it to the seller, so they make sure that everything's up to date. But if you're representing the buyer, be sure and make sure that the seller has provided you with these certificates. You cannot collect rent unless these fees have been paid. And if you read into this, if you want it, I'll send it to everybody. But it's just a good cheat sheet so that we are providing great information in Los Angeles. I have sold there. And I saw that sometimes the new owners weren't aware of this RSO registration of rental units. So I just wanted to throw that in as an additional information. And if you want that printout from me, put it in the chat box and I'll grab it for you and send it. And then there's another tool. I'm not going to open the website, but I just wanted to show you guys. Zemus is a really nice website. You go to www.zemus.com and you can look on Zemus in LA and put in your APN number or your address, and it's going to pull up some information on that property. But it'll also show you if it's in rent control. So I've always kind of popped into Zemus and checked, but you can also, you're going to check with, you can check with Escrow. I always double check there. Hey, do you see it on the map? But this Zemus, if I could give you any suggestion, I would say to go in and play with Zemus. It's a really neat website for Los Angeles. And I believe it's also for Pasadena, but go in and take a look at it. You can put your property APN in there. You can check to see if it's in rent control, and it'll give you some other information about the property. So I just wanted to pull that in so that you were aware that there is a website where if you're selling in LA, the first site I go to check if it's under rent control before I even ask the landlord is www.zemus.com. I put in the APN and then it'll prompt you through, but please take a look at this. It's kind of a neat website that they've built, and it's very helpful to those of us that are selling in rent control areas. Okay. So I think that concludes. Remember on LA units, they may be required to have a business license. I do have a sheet on that, but but you can look on the web, the internet and pull that up. But just make sure if you're representing a buyer that you're trying to help them, tell them to check with their, accountants or any real estate lawyer, but make sure you're at least pointing them in the direction, because I've seen it in LA where they weren't even pointed in the direction to get those units, make sure they were registered, and then to make sure they're changing the name and make sure that they have a business license. Again, they can talk to a real estate attorney about those items, but at least let's be pointing them in the direction so that they know what questions to ask. Okay.
Michelle,
Uh-huh.
some of the forms that the disclosure forms that you mentioned belong to the AIR.
Correct.
Association of Industrial Real Estate. Most of the agents in Alhambra don't belong to AIR. So how can they get access to the forms?
Yes, I knew that question was coming. I believe that Anna has a blank that we've been using. The ones I pulled in were off of Shumay's accounts, thus they say draft across them. But we will provide you with those forms, because in commercial, the only thing that acts as the huge disclosure, that property information sheet, is so critical because it's where the seller is disclosing everything they know. So we will provide you those two sheets. We require those on transactions. Those are the only AIR forms that I've seen the brokerage provide. We can't provide you contracts and stuff, but we can provide you those two forms because we are requesting those on our commercial transactions. They are very important forms.
Yeah. Well, in that vein, can you mention about the car forms that can integrate the AIR forms by just joining membership for 90, was it 95 or 100?
199 a year.
199 per year.
Yeah, so Peter and I were researching, because we know that there's a lot of agents that need AIR, but they don't need a lot, but they still would benefit from having access to AIR forms. So in our research, we found, and it's wonderful news for all of us, that CAR actually has a platform where they will provide AIR for $199 annually for members of CAR. If you're not a member, I believe it's $380 or $390 a year, but most of us are members. So you can get access to, I think there was 27 contracts and documents that CAR will provide you for $199 annually. You cannot beat that price. It drops right into your car.org account. I did call CAR because I thought it was a mistake because it was such a great deal. So I also have information on that. If anybody's interested in the print offs that I have for that, please give me your name in the chat box and I'll make sure I email you that. So are there any questions? You can unmute yourself.
I just want to mention that that disclosure of material facts is equally important in the commercial real estate, if not more than the residential real estate. So you really have to disclose all the material facts about the commercial real estate, including if somebody died in the premises. So one time, we have a lawsuit where the listing agent and the seller was sued for not disclosing that there was a death in the swimming pool. And then when they found out, they sue everybody. And then we had to settle for quite a substantial amount of money. So all those material facts are very important and you really cannot overlook it. Another thing is about the master, there's sometimes the property has master land lease, and if you buy the property, it's subject to that master land lease, and that's a very, very important. You have to make sure that the master land lease is acceptable to the buyer before you purchase the property. Otherwise, you run into a lot of trouble later on. Okay, so those are my comments. But Michelle did a very, very good job today in going over the commercial real estate purchase agreement. So I think it's very, very beneficial to everybody.
Okay, Oscar, yeah, you're right. AIR membership can be a couple hundred a month or $195 a month. But what's great is now you can get the forms for $199 a year. I'm looking at comments right now. Let me go through the chat box and make sure we're not missing anybody. Yes, Christine, AIR contract is far different from a car contract. And I've been with Shumay for years, her and I, and together, and I've been typing car contracts and learning. And it's not a process that is overnight. It is a long road, at least for me, to learn where I'm comfortable with AIR contracts. So that takes time, practice. It takes printing it out. It takes reading it and diligently highlighting what you don't understand and getting your questions answered. And it is far different from a car commercial contract, Christine, but since you've been licensed so long, I think you would pick it up quickly. But my recommendation is, for anybody that's interested in that, to go ahead and purchase the forms through a car for $199 annually. And then you can start reading the contracts and asking questions to Peter or, about them. Why pay for something we are not familiar with, meaning that AIR versus car, Christine's asking, Peter?
Why? I'm sorry.
She wants to know, why would we go AIR contract versus car contract?
Well, you don't have to go with AIR, but I think AIR is more sophisticated. They are more complete. They are more catering to commercial instead of the car forms. But car form does a pretty good job too. They have pretty good substantial agreement on that as well. So you can mix match using both of them if you feel comfortable. You don't have to use a particular form if you don't like it.
Yeah.
So some people, some agents prefer using AIR form because they are so used to it already. They know the content of AIR, but before you use that form, you better go over it very carefully. A lot of information there, so you better acquaint yourself with that form before you use it. Okay.
Yeah. Is there any other questions? You can unmute yourself and talk, because I'm just looking at the chat box.
Yeah, don't be shy. You just unmute yourself and talk and ask questions.
Hey, Michelle, nice pointer on the Zemus reference.
Yeah.
I've been using that website for a long time, and I usually use it to figure out if the property is located within the city of LA.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
that's right.
And also, I feel like if it's located there and the property's built after October 1978. Then it'd be governed under LA City RSO.
Right. And you know what else? You bring up a good point, because what's weird is I've seen, so everybody knows about this rent control. You gotta make sure that you look it up, because you could be sitting in county, and that building will be much more valuable, like apartments, if it's on county. Because the rent control doesn't apply. So when you're pricing units, and Xavier, I know you have a background in this, you want to make darn sure it's not county, because if it's county, boy, that's fantastic, because the rent control doesn't apply. So make sure you're researching that.
Yeah. So, and then on Zemus, I've also used this to source like development related documents, because it acts as a portal to like the development website of the city, and then you could also source the certificate of occupancy if you guys if that needs to be found. So that could be found on there as well.
Yeah, it's fabulous. Like you're saying, there's so much there, Xavier. Thanks for sharing what you're looking for there.
And then also in terms of rent control, I think it's great that you brought that up.
Yes.
And then as everyone knows, you know, in 2020, you know, California passed a statewide rent control law. So, you know, even if the local municipality doesn't have its own in-place rent control, then that municipality and or property would be subject to, what is it, AB 1482, I think it is.
Yeah.
And therefore, I think that like the max rent increase would be 5% plus CPI, and I think it's capped at 10%.
That's
Yes,
correct.
that's correct.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's
Mhm.
correct.
Hi, Michelle, it's me, Oscar. How are you doing?
Hi, Oscar.
Hi. Another thing that you might wanna tell the people that wanna be getting properties in rent control. One of the big things is to make sure that's not in the REAP program.
Oh, thank you. See, we
Because
learned.
if it's in the REAP program, first of all, the owners are not gonna be getting any money. Everything's gonna be going to the city escrow program. And then it's hard to get them out of the REAP program,
Okay.
especially with the professional tenants. They're always breaking things, you know.
Mm.
That's one thing
Yeah.
about a big thing about rent control. Make sure it's not in the REAP program.
Yes.
I had some bad experiences with that. I did that for many years, and it's a hassle.
Yeah, you know, when you're dealing well, I've dealt in Los Angeles on buildings. When you're dealing in rent control areas, agents, as Oscar and Xavier are mentioning, there's so much more things that you need to be on your toes about. It's not something to be cavalier about. There's a lot that we need to know. You know, so just make sure that if you're in rent control, selling as a listing agent or you're representing a buyer, if you don't understand things, make sure you're getting the information and asking, because it can be quite dicey if you're not sure. But we're here to help you.
Yeah, especially when you go to court for the REAP program, is no fun.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you, Oscar. That's very valuable.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Let's see. Let me see. There's some questions in the chat box. Oh, Christine, yeah, don't pay for something that you don't think you'll use and you're not familiar with. Just go ahead and use the car, and you're making a point that AIR may be better for shopping centers. Forms, yeah, I'll leave that to the agent's discretion. Yes, there is a phone number that you can also call to verify if the property is in rent control in LA. That is correct.
Mhm.
And they get back to you automatically. It is very easy. Thank you, Christine. That is correct. You can also call in. Does anybody else have any questions or comments?
Well, Michelle, this is Clint.
Hi, Clint.
Well, good morning. The question I have for you is that rent control apartment down in LA, I understand that. But the new law that passed 2020, isn't that the whole state of California rental out rent control?
Yeah, I'm going to let Peter address that.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is. It's a statewide rent control, but it's subject to the local rent control as well. It's the straightest rent control ordinance that
Right.
apply that
So
control.
based on that, we can say the whole California, the state is rent control.
Yes,
Okay,
definitely.
thank you so much. Okay,
Yes.
thank
You're
you.
right. Mhm.
But there's the different aspects of things that for LA, you know, that you'll need to be checking.
Yeah, because LA, I believe, is more stringent.
Right, because
Yeah.
there's the fees.
Yeah,
Right.
and LA City is always more stringent than the state, so you
Got
can be assured of that.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Michelle.
Mhm.
Welcome.
Anybody else? I want to let you
I
guys
think Kathy
know.
have a question.
Oh, okay.
Michelle.
Okay, less documentation is required to comply when using AR than on car contract as shown on Sky Slope is my comment. Yeah, Kathy, I'll answer just how we do it. Like when we're using, and Shumei is a big user of AIR contract. So even when we're using AIR, I'm still filtering in some car forms that the company's requiring. I do filter those in and put it with the AIR contract just to make sure that since the company's asking for those forms that I'm complying. So you can like possible representation, wire fraud, anything like that that I need to add in. I just add it in as a car form and an attachment to the AIR document. But yes, it's a lot less disclosures. And always make sure you're doing your agency disclosure with your AIR.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's true, Kathy. It's from time to time and depending on the transaction, what additional disclosures you're going to need. And then we have coming up, and if you have any suggestions, please type them in for training. But we're going to do a mobile home training. And that's going to be ran by an escrow company that does mobile home transactions, which is Marie, that comes to our office meetings. And that will be at the first week of June. Christine, AIR contract is very, training on that would be really difficult for me. I mean, and I've been using them for years. Peter can jump in. It is a bear.
Yes, that's why I said before you use that, you better spend a little time, but going over it and study it and make sure you're comfortable with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If it's individual, and somebody needs help on AIR, I am not an expert by any means. I do know something. I would help you as much as I can, but as far as training it, AIR has dedicated trainers that train those, and I don't know, I think it's a 2-day seminar, but it's something that I personally, because it's taken me years to really be comfortable, I would not want to train it, to be quite frank, because they have AIR trainers.
Michelle, can we contact the AIR support, and see if they can come into the office and give a little training to the agent?
Yes, now that might be something we can arrange a Zoom meeting so they can go over the AIR contract. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, we'll look into it.
Yeah, we'll check into that, Christine. It's a great point. And then if there's anything else that you are looking forward to be trained on, please throw it in the chat box. Mobile home is coming up. We'll go over the disclosures and what it takes to sell a mobile home and what escrow is going to be looking for and coaching you through to close that deal. So if there's anything else you want to be trained on, we will continue training, but we like to incorporate what you're asking for as well. You can either throw it in the chat box or email me later. Okay.
All right. Very good. Okay, I think the time is up, and I think we should adjourn the meeting. It's been very, very enlightening and educational. Michelle, thank you so much.
Okay,
and I'll see you guys next week, right?
See you all. Thank you, and have a wonderful weekend. Thank you for attending.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Peter.
Mhm.